All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the world. Hope everyone is doing good today. You're here for another Altero sponsored webinar, this one on critical security features in Microsoft 365 that admins simply can't ignore. My name is Andy Serwich, and with me I've got Simon Perriman. How's it going, my friend?
Doing well, thank you. It's our second webinar of the day. It's exciting to be back and a little better time for the people in North America as well.
That's true, that's true. I think for the morning one, you were, had to have been 6 a.m. for you, right?
That's right, yep. 6 a.m. early start. So yeah, it's nice to get a little bit of energy, extra coffee in from the day.
Definitely, definitely. Well, appreciate you being here, Simon, to share your knowledge. So we've got a ton of content to get through, and kind of before we, start talking about our agenda, I kind of wanted to frame today's webinar from the perspective of, what we're going through currently in the world. The fact that everybody is having to work remote from home, more work from anywhere, and the need for security features to kind of accommodate that, right? I mean, with more remote work, there's a little bit more risk. People are using devices that maybe they don't normally use for work, and a whole plethora of other issues around security, right? And I think more personally, the other reason I kind of wanted to, I kind of felt that this webinar was important was, I'm back in the trenches now working for a cloud service provider. It still surprises me to this day how many people still associate Office 365 and Microsoft 365 with just email, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really, in reality, the platform is so much more than that. And from a security perspective, I hope as we step through the content today, you'll really see that. You'll see the full, the full array of security offerings in this platform as we step through. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and get to the agenda. So again, like I said, we've got a lot to cover in a 40 or 45 minute time span here. I want to leave some room for questions at the end. But one thing I want to kind of set about this webinar is that with everything we've got on the list here, we're looking to do basically a large overview of everything that's contained as far as security is related in the Office 365 / Microsoft 365 platform. That's going to include things like Azure Active Directory, email protection, the EMS suite, Security Center, Compliance Center. We're going to talk about licensing at the end as well. And then we're going to leave some room for Q&A at the end of the webinar. Now, each one of these bullet points here could probably necessitate their own webinars, right? We could spend probably a whole series of webinars on Azure Active Directory, right? So we're going to be making sure that we hit a very, hit these topics at a high level, give you some extra resources to go and look at to learn some more information. And we're going to do our best to get to all your questions. Now, if you ask a question that doesn't get answered today, we'll be sure to do a follow-up blog post. And, that blog post will contain a full list of the questions and their associated answers. So again, if you ask a question today that doesn't get answered, be on the lookout for a follow-up blog post with that information. And additionally, as we step through each section, Simon and I will do our best to try and answer questions in the chat, in the questions form as we step through. Otherwise, we'll try and answer some verbally at the end as well. So from there, let's go over to some introductions. So again, my name is Andy Serwich. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the Cloud and Data Center Management competency. And historically, you might have seen me on previous Altero webinars, actually being a technical evangelist for Altero. I've since gone to work for a cloud service provider here in Michigan. I felt the need to kind of get my hands dirty, actually working with the technology again. And that CSP is called Insight Business Solutions. So I'm an enterprise client advisor for Insight, and my day in, day out is providing VCIO type services for my client base. So I'm quite active on Twitter. So if you think of a question after the webinar that you forgot to ask, hit me up on Twitter. I'll be happy to get you an answer there. And other than that, I'll pass it over to Simon to do his introduction.
Thanks, Andy. Hey, everybody. I'm Simon Perriman. My background was Microsoft, actually. So I spent about 8 years with the company, 4 years as an engineer building some of their cloud platform, and then 4 years as a technical evangelist covering all the cloud and data center technologies. From there, I moved to a Microsoft partner, Five9 Security, as an executive on their team. I left that and been running my own startup for a couple of years. And everything that we use built on Microsoft, including Microsoft Azure and Office 365. So I wanted to come in and kind of give a slightly different perspective, both from the actual product side, why Microsoft built some of these technologies in their strategy, from a partner side, how to use them, and then also from a customer side, as I go ahead and use these best practices every day for my own business. So hopefully across that, with Andy, with much more hands-on experience, you're gonna get a breadth of knowledge. And I'll pass it back over to Andy.
Sounds good. Thanks, Simon. Yeah, it's kind of unique having that perspective from all sides, isn't it? So there we'll go and talk about the sponsor of today's webinar, Altero Software. So Altero, again, is a backup vendor. They make some pretty awesome backup software. The company was founded in 2009, and really the target company is companies with employees, like an employee count of less than 1,000. As far as portfolio goes, Altero has a customer list of 50,000 plus across 121 countries with 10,000 plus partners and 2,000 plus MSPs worldwide. And really, they focus on, again, backup solutions, both for on-premise Hyper-V, VMware, as well as Office 365, and some other things as well. We're going to have some links to some of those backup technologies that you can check out a little bit later in the webinar here if you're interested. Otherwise, feel free to ask any questions about that as you want, and we'll try to get answers for those as well. So from there, first thing I want to do is kind of do a set on where people are. I want to kind of get a little bit of feedback from you guys on what challenges do you really encounter when deploying 365 security. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and that poll should be up, so feel free to vote if you want to. And I'm pretty sure this is going to turn out just like our poll did this morning. And I'm guessing that the biggest struggle that people have are probably budgetary restrictions and lack of knowledge. Simon, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to line up like we did this morning?
I think that's probably going to happen. And I think what this leads to help us identify is some of the biggest misconceptions, that setting up this additional security is complex and it does add additional costs. And hopefully what you're going to discover is that it really doesn't. Microsoft has done an incredible job of providing these additional security and compliance add-ons outside of, based on what license you have, but for no additional cost, right? And I think that's really critical, because one of Microsoft's biggest advantages that no one else has is the fact that they have billions of endpoints, right? If you're part of the Microsoft Office network and someone else's computers get hacked across the world, Microsoft has detected that. They've been aware of that threat, and they're proactively trying to secure the rest of those other billions of devices. So you actually get huge benefits from Microsoft's artificial intelligence and machine learning to really help that entire infrastructure as well. It's pretty cool what Microsoft's been able to do.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of information to be gleaned from all that data and that security expertise, right? And it's great to see them share and provide those capabilities to customers as well. So I'm sharing the poll results here, and it's pretty similar to what we saw this morning, with lack of knowledge being the #1. So no surprises there. What's a little different though is lack of time is just about in line with budgetary restrictions. I think lack of time, at least for the EU session, was a little bit lower, if I remember correctly. So that's kind of an interesting piece of data there. So yeah, definitely as we step through these slides today and start talking to you about the content, kind of keep these in the back of our minds. That way we can kind of point out bits and pieces that pertain to this information here. So really appreciate you guys sharing your opinions there. So with that, let's get to the content. First thing we're going to talk about is Azure Active Directory. Now, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, Azure AD is one of those topics that we could probably spend 3 or 4 webinars on. It is such an expansive topic. And what I'm going to do here is just give you a quick overview of what it is and why it's important in this discussion. And to focus in on what is Azure Active Directory, my horrible dad joke for Azure AD is that it's not your grandpa's identity service. Haha, right? That's one of my guilty pleasures, are horrible dad jokes that are just bad. So forgive me on that one. But anyway, like I said, it's literally not the same identity service that we've been used to working with for the last 10 to 15 years. It's quite a bit different than the on-premises Active Directory services we've been using. And that's really because it's designed to be a cloud-based identity service, both for Microsoft 365, for Azure, and more. You can even use it for third-party application. So it's a great tool, and it really sits at the core of what we're trying to do here with security on the Microsoft 365 platform. And again, like I said, it serves as the core for modern day security features. And what often also enters into the conversation when it comes to Azure AD is, well, hey, I already have my on-premises Active Directory environment. My users already have their usernames and passwords. How do I leverage that but in Azure AD? That kind of comes into the hybrid cloud discussion, right? And the fact is that with Azure AD can be connected with on-premises AD through an application called Azure AD Connect. Basically, it's a service that runs, that pulls in the username and passwords from your on-premises Active Directory instance, pulls them into Azure AD. That way, your users have a uniform login experience amongst on-premise and in the cloud. Now, one thing I always like to bring up when I'm talking about Azure AD is the comparison to Azure ADDS. They're not to be confused with each other. So Azure AD is the cloud-based M365 Azure identity service that we're talking about. Azure ADDS is a managed instance of the on-premises Active Directory running inside of Azure virtual machines. So the question I'm always asked is, well, if I'm migrating to the cloud or doing hybrid, which one should I use? And I always come back to the concept of complexity, really. If you're already in a highly complex on-premise Active Directory environment with tons of group policy objects, you probably want to look at Azure ADDS. But if you want to get to a cloud native, kind of a modern authentication and an authorization platform, you definitely want to look at Azure AD and see what you can do to get there. So that's kind of my advice when comparing the two. From there, I just want to do another quick overview of what else is included with Azure Active Directory, and it's an expansive service. There's so much packed into Azure AD. These are kind of the highlights as far as security goes. First one being authentication, including multi-factor authentication. You've got conditional access. For those that aren't aware, conditional access is a feature inside of Azure AD that allows us to kind of more granularly control the login mechanism and the access to services within the Microsoft Cloud, right? We got device management, we got the usual domain services, hybrid identity, which I've talked about a little bit already in regards to the Azure AD Connect feature. We got identity protection. Identity protection is a really cool feature in Azure AD. You think about modern security today and the fact that you can go out on the deep web and probably buy a list of usernames and passwords somewhere. What Azure Identity Protection does is it keeps an eye on those known locations where usernames and passwords are sold. And if it detects that, a user account that resides in Azure Active Directory is out there on the deep web, you as the administrator can take action based on that information. So force a password reset for that affected user, et cetera, et cetera. We also have managed identities for Azure resources through role-based access control. Basically what that is, you got your teams managing Azure resources. Azure Active Directory acts as the backbone authentication mechanism for managing access to those Azure resources for your IT team. And then we also have privileged identity management, or PIM, also kind of a cool feature. What this is really designed to do is it's designed to make your internal IT operations have a little bit more accountability. So what PIM does is it does things like just-in-time access to a server or time-bound access to a server. So let's say I can provide, Joe, my junior administrator, access to a server, but only for the next 20 minutes. And after 20 minutes, it automatically disables that access. Things like that. Also having your administrators put in a reason for why they need access to a system, or notifying somebody that a system was accessed by an administrator, things like that. Like I said, ways to provide more accountability inside of your IT organization. This is by no means a comprehensive list of everything in Azure Active Directory. If you want a little bit more information, you can use the link below. Don't worry, you don't have to scramble to write down the URL there. You will be getting a copy of the recording as well as the copy of the slide deck after this webinar. So you can just get the URL then. From there, I wanted to take a second and do a demo on conditional access. So let me end the show there and hop over to the demo environment.
And just as a reminder for everyone out there, please ask questions. We are actively monitoring it, so keep them coming as we go along. We'll try to answer as many as we can in real time.
Indeed. Are you able to see my demo environment there, Simon?
I actually see your screen that has the demo on it, but yeah, I do see your screen right now.
Good, good. It's so funny story. Our session this morning, my Dell doc decided to take the day off right in the middle of my conditional access demo this morning. So since then, I have made the requisite sacrifices to the demo gods. So fingers crossed that won't happen again. Anyway, so here I've got Azure Active Directory, and if you're not familiar with how to access Azure AD, what you do is you log into office.com and you come into your Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Down underneath Admin Centers, you can access Azure Active Directory right there, and it will drop you out to the Azure AD dashboard. Now, what I'm demoing here is I'm actually going to show you how to create a new policy in conditional access, which I mentioned earlier is that service in Azure AD that provides a little bit more granular control over how users access resources inside of your cloud environment. So you can access the conditional access settings by going to Enterprise Applications, Conditional Access. Alternatively, you can also access conditional access in Endpoint Manager by going to Enterprise Endpoint Security, and you'll see conditional access down here as well. So depending on which tool you're in, you can access it in both places. I'm used to accessing it through Azure AD, so I'm going to do so here. So here you can see that we've got a couple of baseline policies created. One thing I noticed when I was working on this demo was that these policies are deprecated and no longer being enforced. So even though you might see these baseline policies here, disregard them. Excuse me. Now, in order to create a new policy, we click on New Policy. And again, the whole point of this tool is to more granularly define how our users access information inside of Azure, inside of Microsoft 365, right? So in my demo environment, I've only got a couple of users here, but you'll be able to see how this process works. So I'm going to name my policy just test policy. And then we have to assign this to users or groups. It could be all users, none. We could select users and groups. The one thing I like about this tool is if you're setting up a policy that could potentially lock you out, it kind of notifies you. So you see here, don't lock yourself out. So the tool does a good job of making sure you don't shoot yourself in the foot, which is kind of nice. So in this case, you know, for my demo purposes, we're going to go and select users and groups. And we're going to pick on my wife. I put a test user account for my wife in here. So I know that she's got Mac OS and she runs an iPhone. And, you know, let's say I want to make sure that when she's logging into this tenant with her iPhone or her Mac, there's a little bit more of a security presence during that login process. So that's what we're going to do here. So I selected her as, you know, the target of this policy. Now, what do we want to target? So what do we want to, when she's accessing what resource do we want this policy to apply? Do we want it to be all cloud apps? Do we want it to be select apps? One question I commonly get is the user action here. Why would you select this? So what this is when you're registering multi-factor authentication information, that's what this policy does. So for example, if I wanted to make sure that my users were on a network that I trust, and only at that location can they register multi-factor authentication information, that's what this option here is for. So most cases, you're not going to use that unless you're turning on MFA for the first time. But we're going to stick with cloud apps for this option. So I can do all cloud apps, and again, it's going to yell at me, don't lock yourself out, or you can select individual apps. You'll also see third-party applications that are tied to your tenant in here as well. For example, Altera Office 365 Backup. So for this purpose, you know, whenever my wife uses an Office application, I want her to take an additional step during the login process. So that's why I'm going to select Office 365. So from there, I'm going to click Done. And under what conditions will this happen? So there's a number of different things. We've got the option for sign-in risk. And a common question I get here is, well, yeah, we can do sign-in risk, but what does high mean? What does low mean? What does medium mean? It doesn't really call that out here. And really what it is it's kind of a matrix of different things that kind of raises the score. You know, did you log in, you know, on the other side of the world 5 minutes ago? That's kind of like a high security risk. Did you log in at 2 different places at the same time? That's a high security risk. Are you logging in from a strange IP address? That kind of raises the bar a little bit too. So there's a whole list of behind the scenes stuff that falls into that risk level. Device platform. So if we want to target, make this policy occur on only certain devices, we can do that. So like I mentioned earlier, my wife, she uses iOS, she uses Mac OS. So we're going to select those 2 platforms. Locations. So the big thing here is you can specify a trusted IP range. So for example, in those corporate offices where you've got a static IP address, and the most common use case I've seen for this is in the case of multi-factor authentication. The most common thing I see is organizations will configure conditional access to not prompt for multi-factor authentication when the user is within the office, within that specified IP range. So kind of you're assuming that the office is a trusted location, therefore they don't have to take the extra steps of doing multi-factor authentication. I'm going to disregard that for right now. Client apps, this is in preview. If you want a conditional access policy to apply to things like browsers and mobile apps, you can do so. What this really does is kind of controls access to corporate data. So your office.com apps, basically, you can make it so access is only allowed from a managed browser. Like for example, on an iOS device, if you wanted to make it so Safari couldn't access those web-based apps, you could do that here. You could make it so they would have to download Edge on the iPhone in order to access those company applications. And then device state, basically you can do a couple of interesting things here. You know, you can include all device states, but what's really interesting here is you can actually exclude certain devices from this policy using this if you wanted to. For example, if the device is hybrid Azure AD joined, meaning it exists in an on-premises Active Directory environment somewhere, you could exclude that from this policy, or if the device is marked as compliant inside of Microsoft Intune. Those are 2 other options that you can do to kind of facilitate exactly how you want this policy to work. And then from there, we've got our access controls. You know, you can block access based on these conditions. You can grant access, but require a few additional things. You can require that MFA is prompted in that situation, or that the device be marked as compliant. You can require that the device be Azure AD joined. You can require that it's an approved client app. Or an app protection policy, a lot of different stuff that you can select in here. Again, it's all about finely controlling how people log in and use their information, access their information. Now, you have the option of turning the policy on or off. What I find really interesting is you can make this policy report only. So in the situations where you're like, what would happen if, you know, this policy was enabled, you can get a report and conditional access will how it would enable across your infrastructure. Now I'm going to close this. There's one other thing I want to show you really quick, kind of back to the what would happen under a certain situation. That's also kind of what this what if button does. You can see how certain conditional access policies will affect certain users in certain situations. That's what this whole tool here does. So really powerful as you start setting up conditional access inside of your environment. So with that, I don't want to take up too much more time. We have a lot to cover yet. I think we are now over to you, Simon, to talk about email security and ATP, I believe.
Sounds great. Let me just connect my screen here. But Andy, we actually had 4 different questions come up all on the same topic. So hoping you can jump in and answer this one quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
For conditional access and multi-factor authentication, what license is required? Does that come with the standard one, or is that one of the premium licenses to get those advanced AD features, or is that even part of Office 365, M365?
Yeah, you need some of the premium AD features on that one. I'm going to cover licensing a little bit later in the webinar, so I'll have a little bit more information on that then.
Sounds good. All right, guys, so we're going to talk a little bit more about email protection now. This is really important to consider, not just protecting your email from getting read, but Also making sure that you back up your email. One of the biggest misconceptions about Microsoft 365, Office 365, is that Microsoft actually does backups for you. That is completely not true. And if you carefully read their service availability context, it says you are required to back up your own data. We recommend using third-party apps and services. So what Microsoft basically does, right, is they keep that primary instance of your data, the active inbox, the active files online and available. They do have certain types of retention policies that they build in for documents, so they're saved for a while but may get deleted afterwards. But nothing's backing them up. If one of those documents gets corrupted, the backups of those documents are also going to be corrupted. Another big challenge that we see around Office 365 is people leaving the organization. Even if you had retention policies and that a person's left, you either have to keep paying for their Office 365 account to keep that data alive, or you lose that data as well. So one of the big challenges that we really saw around this is we got to do proactive protection around email, and then also make sure we're backing it up. And so we'll show you how these things tie together shortly. Now, when it comes to email protection, this is usually your front line of defense. Pretty much all of your users are going to be using email, so you really want to think about this as one of the fundamental areas that you protect after you've set up that fundamental Active Directory environment. Now, Microsoft Office, they have this built-in feature called ATP, Advanced Threat Protection. And ATP has dozens of smaller components in it that use all different types of tools and best practices that Microsoft has aggregated, again, from its billions of data points and machine learning that it uses. Now, the first common feature you'll see that you can enable and should keep on by default are safe links. What this basically does is every email that includes a link to an external website, Microsoft will scan it and make sure that it doesn't show up on a blacklist site of scam sites, hacker sites, things like that. It's basically going to do basic verification. It's going to ensure that sites have active security certificates, things like that. And it will flag you saying, we don't think this link or this site is secure. You've probably seen that many times yourself. Now, even though this is built into email and also available for OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, this one feature will actually be available in all Office products. So even if you have links in Microsoft Word or Excel, those links should also be scanned, analyzed, and your users alerted. Now, the more advanced version of this is the safe attachments. It's a similar concept. Microsoft basically automatically scans attachments. And what they're doing is they're looking for known viruses or threats, which are included in that attachment. Now, a lot of people get nervous. Is Microsoft reading my email? Is Microsoft opening my attachments? No. What they're really doing is they're looking for certain bits which match known viruses within that email, or certain links that go to bad sites, and flagging those. And the way that antivirus works in general is it will take a look at any type of application or file, and it will do a mathematical calculation on that file known as a hash. It then takes that number, compares it to a list of other known viruses, and if there's a match, there's fairly clear certainty that that file contains the virus within it. So fundamentally, what Microsoft's doing is automatically scanning every email attachment going through your environment, comparing it to their massive databases of other types of threats that are out there. Now, as Microsoft continued to build up their knowledge base as well, phishing attacks became more and more prominent. As you likely know, a phishing attack is where somebody tricks a user into sharing information, such as acting like they're customer support or they're part of your own IT staff, requesting them to click on links or share information or passwords. And of course, this can cause lots of severe consequences. So the way Microsoft try to protect against the anti-phishing policies is really using a lot of artificial intelligence, looking for anomalies. Now, with phishing, these attacks are usually unique. They're controlled by a certain bad actor, and so they can vary, which means they're often not done the same, making it hard to proactively detect and identify them. But what Microsoft is able to do using its billions of endpoints is, as soon as it starts to notice phishing attacks happening in maybe one part of the world, it can alert, protect, and harden the rest of that data center as well. So it's going to look for things such as mismatched links. So if the link says it's going to Microsoft.com, but the actual code says it goes to a different site, it's going to go and flag those as another example. And all this information gets put in an ATP report in a real-time dashboard. So this dashboard gives you all the information about active threats, whether it's malware, viruses, anything like that, and allows you to generate reports, which may be important for you if you're in any type of regulated industry. Now, so looking at some of the more advanced features, the first one that I really like to call out is the Threat Explorer. What this does is it allows you to dive into details of any type of threat that's in your environment that's been identified. So you can see real-time information, you can see in the screenshot at the bottom, of how many of these different threats are happening on each day within the entire data center. So this can help your team maybe focus on trying to protect against one type of vulnerability or even user education. The threat trackers are widgets that go into the dashboard that you can add or remove yourself, and these provide you with information about global threats. So when some of these ransomware attacks or the WannaCry virus are released, you can actually see globally and regionally who's being impacted with this. So it allows you to get insight not just on your own issues, but also trend in industry issues where you're potentially vulnerable as well. And with all of that, Microsoft then built the AIR feature, the automated incident response. If Microsoft detects that one of your users has been infected or an inbox or an application, or it's flagged one of these threats, it's going to try to do automated remediation action and try to do the best practices to prevent a user from being infected or try to recover. That might be a case of, locking the user out, requiring them to change a password, notifying the administrator, temporarily restricting access and making a user have to re-request it from the admin. So a lot of best practices that you want to include have now been automated to continue to help protect the system. And the final, one of my favorite ones, is the attack simulator. This is something a lot of people don't know about. And if you're not sure whether your staff is going to be competent and trained, it's a great tool. Basically, it allows you to simulate different attacks. It will send out fake phishing attacks, fake password brute force attacks, and basically see who in your environment is actually clicking on the links and would have been tricked into downloading malware. And you can see from the screenshot in the upper right, this is an example where it's basically saying, hey, look, you were vulnerable. We need to now go and educate you. And this is something that I really encourage. If your workforce is maybe less technical, you're not coming from a computer company where everyone knows about advanced passwords and things like that, I definitely consider looking for that, particularly when you have staff who aren't used to working remotely. Education is a big piece of, one of these the best practices you have to follow and try to help instill through all of your users in your environment. Now, the best way to recover from all of these is backing up your data, right? As we talked about, Microsoft keeps one copy of your data, the live copy, but doesn't back it up. So even though we have all of these best practices around protecting hacks, anti-phishing, if somebody gets a ransomware attack and it locks up their inbox, they've lost access to their data. If someone accidentally permanently deletes mail, that's permanently gone, right? So it's always, always, always a best practice to actually back up all of your Office 365 files. Now, Altera sponsored this session because they have the leading backup solution in the market for Office 365. Simple, easy to use, covers all of your key documents and data. And in fact, I'm going to give you a very quick demo of this to give you an overview of what to expect. Now, what you see here is the Altera Office 365 backup. This is a web-based console that allows you to centralize all of the information and protect all of your users. And in fact, if you're a managed service provider, you can protect multiple organizations and actually resell this backup as a service to your existing customers. And what the dashboard view is going to do is basically keep track of all of the activities, give me a summary of how my mailbox, my OneDrive, and my SharePoint backups are happening. Now, for me to actually create a backup, we can automatically discover new users in the environment, and we go and configure automatic backup. 4 times a day, Altera is going to automatically protect all of the data for all of your users. It actually backs everything up to Altera's own cloud that runs in Microsoft Azure, based in European Union, so GDPR protected. And this means that when you use the backup, you don't have to worry about where you're storing it, maintaining that data. If you back up with Altera, your data has no size restrictions. You can store an unlimited amount, and it gets protected indefinitely. So it really is kind of the go-to option if you have critical information in your emails or other types of Office tools. Now you can see down here that we can see all of the backups in my environment. And if I wanted to go and create a new type of backup, I can simply select take backup, restore a backup, etc., etc. And what we'll actually do is we'll just go through a quick restore operation. First, we'll just go and select my organization. It's going to go and scan the users in my environment. I'm going to go and select a mailbox, select the version, and then this is one of the best features. I have different places where I can go and restore this backup. I can restore it to my own inbox or to someone else's inbox. Let's say, for example, I had a user leave my environment a month ago, a year ago. I need access to some of his email or data. I can restore that inbox to my own inbox to get access to that data. We can also save a PST file or a zip file. We'll keep it simple and just restore to the regular inbox. We hit restore, we verify credentials, making sure that only administrators have access, and the restore process happens. But a lot of people say, what if I only want to restore a single email? Well, we have the ability to do that as well. There's granular restore, which basically does item level restore. From here, we're able to go and actually select, are we trying to restore mailboxes? Who is it from? What individual item is this? And this really does allow us to go peek into this and actually traverse my inbox, individual files. So if I only want to restore this particular message, it's that simple. Next, next, next. We've got it restored. So pretty cool utility. The final thing I'll just mention here is there are alerts built in as well. So if you have issues with the backups, copies not being taken, failures, we can notify the admin as well. So really a powerful utility that you can use to get that extra protection that Microsoft is no longer offering. Let me go ahead now and I'll turn it back over to Andy, who's going to be talking a little more about the Microsoft Enterprise Mobility Suite, EMS.
Sounds good. Thanks, Simon. So next thing in our list here is EMS. And we've talked about some individual tools so far, a number of different tools actually. And what EMS does is it actually brings together a lot of various security offerings inside of the Microsoft 365 suite and bundles them into this enterprise mobility bundle here. And really it's, I keep using that word expansive, and it applies to this as well. It's a full suite of offerings. It's designed to protect all facets of your IT infrastructure, endpoints, identity, devices, mobile, cloud resources. It really enables that cloud native experience, I would say, in my opinion. So, part of the reason I say that is, if you've ever utilized an environment that is leveraging all of these cloud native technologies to the nth degree, it really kind of changes the way that you can do work, especially in this kind of BYOD environment. So if you go to the next slide there, Simon, we can see that again, Azure AD is tied in as part of this. I'm not going to rehash Azure AD because we've already talked about it. But on the next slide after this, I think, is the Endpoint Configuration Manager in Intune. And you think about the way we've done things on premises for a long time. We've always used AD and group policy to manage our endpoints. Well, in this cloud native world, when people ask me like, okay, I'd love to go cloud native, but how do I manage my endpoints? That's where Endpoint Configuration Manager and Intune come in. You can really see the combination of these two as kind of your all-in-one endpoint management tool, and it really, like I said earlier, it really kind of enables this BYOD culture. And the example that I always give is, well, not always, but recently give, is since I've come on with Insight. I remember my first day at Insight, I walk in, I take my Surface Book out of its box, I open it up, I authenticate with my Azure AD credentials, and everything is auto-populated to me. 10 minutes, I'm gone from a new user to a productive user. And then same thing, if you need to use a machine that you don't normally have. For example, one of my coworkers had left their machine at home. Instead of taking the 15 or 20 minutes to go there and get it and come back, pulled an old clunker Dell out of the closet. I mean, one of those big Dell laptops, it's like a boat anchor, opens that thing up, does the same thing, authenticates with Azure AD, pulls down his usual tool set, and was completely productive within 10 or 15 minutes. And it's all done in a secure fashion too, right? Verified that user account is able to authenticate and access the resources And like I said, taking advantage of all these tools to the nth degree really changes the IT computing culture within an organization for the better, in my opinion. The next screen, I think we're talking about SecureScore. Yep. So I said it in the session this morning, and I'll say it here again. If there's one thing that you take away from today's webinar, I would say go take a look at Microsoft SecureScore. It's a simple but super powerful tool for identifying potential vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in your environment. Because let's face it, we don't all have time when we're in the trenches to go out and keep up to date on all the current security vulnerabilities. We don't have time to, comb through our infrastructure all day, every day to find misconfigurations. That's what SecureScore does for you. It'll actually take a look at your configuration in Microsoft 365 and other locations and actually provide you with recommendations on how to improve your security posture. Like for example, if you've got administrators in the environment that don't have multi-factor authentication enabled, it will say, hey, you should go enable multi-factor authentication for these users, and then it awards you gives you some points. So I mean, really, it kind of gamifies the idea of security, right? And that, if you're a longtime gamer like I am, it kind of comes back to well, how high a score can I get, right? So I mean, it really does a good job of kind of identifying those areas where you could improve and gives you resources on how to take care of those recommendations as well. And really, it's just a powerful tool. And I know that Simon's going to talk about it a little bit more here shortly. A couple other things that are included in the Enterprise Mobility Suite. We've got Azure Information Protection, which is another really cool feature. Think about all of that sensitive information that you have within your organization. Depending on your industry, it might be HIPAA-related information, PCI, might be ITAR, related information. What Azure Information Protection allows you to do is to basically label those types of information inside of your native Office applications. For example, if you're working with a Microsoft Word document that has financial information in it, you can label it as a financial asset. And then using AIP, you have options to take actions like prevent that Word file from being sent outside of the organization in email, or preventing certain people from viewing that file. Again, giving you a little bit more finer, granular control over who accesses information, how it makes its way throughout and outside of the organization. Cloud App Security is another feature that you get in the EMS Suite. What Cloud App Security allows you to do is inventory all those cloud applications that are being used within your tenant, and also kind of gauge them for how secure they are. One of my personal favorite things about Cloud App Security is it really does a good job of identifying shadow IT within your organization. What applications out there are being used within your organization. Cloud App Security helps identify those, and then it helps you as the administrator kind of like I said, gauge them. Is it a secure app? Is it not? And it helps you make that decision of whether or not that application should continue to reside in the environment or not. And then combine between the two, advanced threat analytics, advanced threat protection. Basically, those two items give you everything that you need to prevent, analyze, and respond to breaches should one ever occur. And those are two great features as well. And again, they could, encompass their own webinar along with a lot of these other features. But again, it's all about just raising awareness, letting you know which tools are available out there inside of the EMS Suite. And a little bit later on, I will be talking about how do these EMS Suite features license in together with some of the other features that we've talked about. So from here, I think we're back over to you, Simon, right?
That's right. And so we're going to dive into the Security Center a little more right now. Now, Andy gave you a preview of the SecureScore. Now, here's something that we want to ask everyone to do. Go ahead and check your own security score right now. If you go to security.microsoft.com, log into the dashboard with your admin account for Office M365, go ahead and tell us what you have. So you can actually type that in the chat window, and it's always kind of interesting seeing people's scores. Probably one of the first questions we're going to get is, why do we have different scores? Some people go up to about 283, some people 700, some people 1,000. That's going to be based on which Office license you have. Different Office licenses include different components, different features, which have additional security tests running for them. So what does the Security Center do? Well, fundamentally, it's a centralized console giving you insight to all of your users through the access in Microsoft 365. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you incidents and alerts telling you about problems, telling you what action has been triggered based on that problem. The Action Center is a centralized dashboard that shows all of the issues that have happened and includes best practices to help remediate them, things that you as an admin want to follow up with. You can then generate reports. If you need to go share that with a boss, compliance manager, things like that, you can automate your security. And one of the coolest features that they've added not too long ago is advanced hunting. What this does is it actually uses Microsoft's own AI to do custom scans of your infrastructure, your AD, your emails, things like that, and try to find misconfigurations, anomalies, things like that. So another example, something that you probably can't do independently, is leverage all of Microsoft's advanced learning from those billions of data points. Another thing that a lot of people do is classification. This is a really good best practice. Classification essentially allows you to tag and organize your different users so that you can apply different policies to them. And this is going to be important if you have, regular engineering users versus the brand new remote office workers. You're probably going to want to try to give them some different policies and classifications. Now, with this as well, you could go and classify certain types of threats, certain viruses. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility in how you can manage this. A policy is a best practice, something that will automatically be enforced. So an example is if you detect this type of vulnerability, the policy is to perform this type of action. So let's say we have a new user who creates an account or is onboarded. The policy is they need to go and change their password upon first login. So it allows you to build a lot of these best practices in that infrastructure. And then finally, the secure score. Hey, Andy, do you actually have how are we doing on secure scores right now? What numbers are we seeing?
Seeing some low ones here. I've got 21 out of 238, 62 out of 238, 59 out of 303.
Room for improvement then, right?
Yeah,
no, that's
yeah.
Good.
You and I were talking in the session earlier this morning. I think the highest I've ever seen is in the 800s, but you're pretty
someone in the
880s
this morning maybe or something. I saw someone almost at 900, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is really impressive. Yeah, they're not normally that high. Like you said in the session this morning, I think 500 is about the average.
Yeah. So great way to
was the 140s.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Yeah. Keep it coming again, guys. It's just a great way, as Andy said, to help gamify the platform, right? While it is of course practical, it is kind of a cool way to show progress and show growth. And sometimes I hear different security admins, ask questions about how do I show that that we're doing better. Well, that's a pretty easy way that you can go and demonstrate to your boss that, hey, we are making improvements. Maybe you don't see them, but look, they're happening. Here's some evidence towards that. Next is the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. Pretty much the same concept as the Security Center. And what it's going to do is look at your compliance score. Now, it does it slightly differently. It gives you a percentage in this case, but fundamentally, it's the same thing going through different key factors about having good compliance. Now, again, I encourage you guys to go check that out. I believe the link is compliance.microsoft.com, but Andy, please feel free to correct me. But fundamentally, go log in, check out the compliance, and tell us what your score is. What it's going to look at is product information. So are all the computers you have valid licenses, or is one of the servers going to lock out after 180 days because you're using an evaluation edition? It's going to look at your governance. So if you have different types of corporate policies, group policy, other types of applications, best practices, automated remediation, how you're actually tagging and monitoring your data and your files. It's going to take a look at that. Managing compliance and internal risks are similar. It's going to really follow a lot of best practices that you can have, both external compliance, how you're managing customers' data, as well as how you are internally handling compliance, running reports. Discover and Respond is another machine learning tool that's going to go out and test various things in your environment, try to identify vulnerabilities such as odd file shares, or maybe you have a file with very confidential information that's in a share that's made public. So really trying to look for advanced issues which are unique to your environment. It's going to look at how you can control access. So do the right people have the right permissions, or are there regular users who might have access to sensitive data? And then, of course, device management, which taps into the EMS system. Now, with all of this building up the score, the other key component of the compliance center is what are known as cards. In this case, it's the same concept as a widget, where you can go at it and it gives you an overview of everything in the environment, how shared files are being monitored, apps which are risky, your data life cycle protection policy, when it expires, which is known as disposition, how you're using labels, is shadow IT running different services or applications which aren't domain connected. So again, a lot of interesting things that it's going to look for. And there's also a solutions catalog. So if there's a vulnerability or maybe there's an industry specific compliance requirement or test, PCI, HIPAA, you name it, these partners offer additional tests and solutions which you can use within your own industry or environment. So great broad feature set. And if you aren't using the security center, aren't using compliance center, start using that. Start gradually working towards some of these small things that you can do to help boost that score up. I looks like we're getting a lot of 75%. That's good. We got about a 10%, a couple 65, 75. Okay, good. So sounds like overall we got some pretty good compliance. Better than me. I was actually pretty embarrassed when I looked at our compliance and we were about 25%. So, it happens even to some of the people that are supposed to be the pros of this. Well, let me turn it back over to Andy now.
I was about the same when granted, it's a test environment. When I logged in and looked at the secure score for my test environment, it was like 4%.
Ooh, 4%.
Really doesn't make you feel great about yourself, does it? Anyway, we're talking about licensing next. And whenever I talk about licensing, I always put a big fat disclaimer at the beginning of it, because while I always try to provide the most accurate information available, the fact is licensing is, yes, a legal and financial matter. And I really highly recommend that you seek advice from your own legal counsel and assigned Microsoft representatives prior to making a decision or taking action on licensing matters. Breath. With that said, let's talk about licensing for Microsoft 365 and these security features. So as Simon will attest, I really struggled with how much information to provide in this section. And again, like I've said several times, licensing in Office 365, Microsoft 365 could necessitate its own webinar because, like security, the answer to a lot of questions regarding licensing is, well, it depends, right? And so what I tried to do with the licensing section in this webinar is kind of keep it high level, give you a little bit of information, but try to keep it to 2 slides. So what I've done here, if you just want to quick and easy get a lot of the features that you've seen today, these are the 4 SKUs that you want to really take a look at. You've got your Microsoft 365 Business Premium SKU, which is in the business group of licensing options. It's the only business group of licensing options that provides many of these security features. You've got your Business Basic and your Business Standard, but Business Premium is the only SKU in that section that has a lot of these security features. And the thing with the business line is it's really designed for those organizations that have 300 or less users. 300 or more users, now you're looking at the E5, the E3, and the F3 SKUs, which are really all the enterprise SKUs, right? Those are designed for your organizations that are 300 heads or higher. Now, if you want all the bells and whistles, 365 E5, that is where everything is at. If you want everything, that's where it's at. E3 has a good chunk of the security features we've talked about. I'd have to double check, but I believe the only ones that are not included are some of the more advanced DLP and threat analytic type of features. But that link down at the bottom of the screen in the black banner there, that will give you a link to information to a nice chart that they have on their plans and pricing website that will share what features are included in what SKUs. Kind of the oddball SKU here is the F3 SKU. In this situation, F stands for first line worker. So think about like your manufacturing facilities where your shop floor workers, maybe they access a PC once a day to check webmail, or maybe a hospital where you have nurses that maybe do the same thing, working with patients all day, and maybe they check their webmail during a break or something. Basically somebody who's not sitting in front of a PC every day. They get access to the web applications, and that's about it. But the nice thing about the F3 SKU is it includes a lot of these security features that we've talked about. So you can still provide basic Office services for those users, but in a ultra secure manner that we've been talking about during this webinar today. The other nice thing about licensing for Microsoft 365 is that you're not tied into buying a single SKU. So you don't, if you have 400 users and you want E5, you don't have to buy 400 E5 licenses. Maybe you only have 30 users that you want E5 for. Maybe those 30 users are, a global, remote sales team that they're traveling around using lots of different devices from different locations. And you need that extra security that you get from the features in E5. And then the rest of your staff, maybe they're a combination of E3 and F3. So really you have a lot of granularity there. Now, speaking of granularity, we also have a bunch of add-on licenses that can be leveraged as well on the next slide here. And this isn't a full list of all the different add-on licenses, but it's the two most important types in regards to our conversation today. First, you've got enterprise, basically the EMS stuff that I was talking about earlier. You've got EMS E3 and E5 there at the top, and you'll see that you got $874 a month per user and $1480 per month per user. And then down below that, you've got the various Azure Active Directory plans. You've got the free version, you got the version that comes with Office 365 apps, and then you've got Premium P1 and P2, which contains a lot of the advanced features that we've shown today. Again, if you want to see if the particular feature that you're interested in is covered by any of these add-ons, I've included the links here. And again, you'll get a copy of the slide deck, so you can just click these links later on. But what it comes down to is when you're trying to determine the needs of your organization, if you can go with one of the packages that we showed on the previous slide, I would suggest you do that just for the sake of simplifying licensing, but that doesn't always work for every organization, right? Maybe you're in a situation where you have a business basic user that they only need web apps and the features that come in that package, but you want to add on some additional, identity services through an Azure AD P2 or a EMS E5 or something. You can take those other SKUs that I didn't mention on the previous page and tack these licenses on. And what it comes down to is you as an organization need to take the time to really zero in on what your users need and then do a cost comparison of the lower package SKU combined with an add-on versus like an E3 or an E5 or something like that. So every organization has to do their own homework on that one, but hopefully that kind of at least points you in the right direction and gives you some resources to help make that decision. So with that, I think that wraps up on content for us. We've got a couple more slides to get through here. Get your questions in. Again, if we don't cover all the questions today, we'll be sure to do so in the follow-up blog post. But while you're doing that, I wanted to talk about Altera Office 365 Backup, which Simon showed you a little bit earlier. Again, it is a fantastic, awesome little backup application for Office 365 that is just simple and easy to use. Provides backup of mailboxes. I saw a question earlier, does it back up SharePoint? Yes, it backs up SharePoint Online. You can easily search and restore mail items. It's hassle-free. The storage actually resides in a GDPR compliant data center in the Netherlands, if I remember correctly. That's in Azure. Yep. So you're covered from a GDPR perspective. We provide 24/7 supports. And I did see a question about retention as well. Indefinite retention. So as much retention on those backups as you want. And it's all in one inclusive fee. So unlike the complexities of Microsoft 365 licensing, it's fairly simple with Office 365 Backup. Now on the next slide, I think we've got a couple of links that you can utilize for more information. Go to altera.com/office-365 for more information and to sign up for a 30-day trial. Or if you just want to reach out, you can email support or sales@altera.com, or there is live chat where they've been known to answer all kinds of questions at support.altera.com for more information. From there, I want to run one more poll. So now that you've seen a lot of these features, I kind of want to see where you guys are at as far as what you think is the most important for your organization. So feel free to choose the one that you feel is most important now that you've kind of seen a lot of these. And what we do with this information is we use this to drive future content creation. So, if we see a ton of interest around conditional access, well, we'll start making some videos and blog content around conditional access and the questions that people are asking. Same thing with EMS Suite or Security Center. Or your feedback is greatly appreciated, and we want to make sure that we're getting you the content that you're interested in. So that's what this is all about. So yeah, so Simon, kind of the same as this morning. Everybody loves
Email
the email
protection's
protection.
the popular one, right? But
It is.
I think it does speak, to your demo on the conditional access. We're seeing about 20%. Is that being their primary thing? Security Center's a hot one as well. About 20% there too.
Yep.
Not a lot of love for the EMS Suite nor the Compliance Center. That's
Yeah,
okay. It's tough when you just got to pick one, right?
right,
Hopefully everybody wants to have all 5 of these, right? That's the goal.
right, right. Definitely. Well, appreciate your guys' feedback as always. We'll take this information and we will definitely use it for future content considerations. And boy, I don't know. Looks like we may have to have a webinar specifically about ATP, huh, Simon?
It's a popular one. I think we can do it.
Certainly is. All right. Well, from there, let's move on to the next slide. I wanted to make you aware of a new ebook that's coming available from Altero called The Backup Bible. This was written by Eric Sirens, who, if you are a longtime Altero blog reader, I'm sure you recognize his name. Fantastic technical author, does a great job sharing this information. What I really like that he did with this ebook was, while Altero certainly is mentioned throughout the ebook really focuses on not so much how to use a product, but just in general, backups. How do you do it? What are the best practices? How do you get optimal DR planning? How do you identify your priorities and your risks? It's really just a great, solid, general piece of content. And you should be automatically getting a copy of it via email next week, or it will become available on the website for download in the coming weeks as well. And then I think we're on our Q&A slide now, aren't we? Can't believe we've gone through a whole other hour of content here. But there were a couple of questions that I flagged. Were there any that you wanted to address directly before I get to those, Simon?
I think I've had a chance to kind of knock through the higher priority ones. And for those people who haven't had their questions answered, sometimes we just don't have the details. But again, we will go follow up. We'll get all of these listed in a blog post to make sure we do get everything covered, even if we cannot answer it today.
Yeah, that's the thing with security questions, right? It always comes down to the, well, it depends. Because then it goes from a 1 or 2 sentence reply to, well, if it's this situation, then it could be this. And then if it's this situation, it actually could be that. And it turns into, 3 paragraphs before it's answered. So definitely, if you ask a really detailed question, we appreciate the detail. We love the detail, and we will be sure to get you an answer in our follow-up blog post. But there was one specifically that I flagged that I wanted to make sure I called out. What did I do with it? I know I flagged it. Yeah, here we go.
You got it. Cool. Go for it.
Yeah, it was centered around MSPs and whether or not these tools could be used to replace like an RMM platform like ConnectWise. And right now, I would say the answer to that question is no. And I say that coming from a CSP that actually leverages ConnectWise. We use ConnectWise in-house today for a lot of stuff. And while I'd love to get to a place where it's 100% Microsoft tools for client management, right now I would say the multi-tenant management side is a little bit young in the tooth yet. They're starting to fix a lot of those issues with Microsoft Lighthouse. Simon, I know you wrote a whole series on Microsoft Lighthouse not that long ago, a couple of 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, pretty recent.
Yeah, so definitely out on the Altero MSP blog, altero.com/MSP-dojo, there's a whole series on Azure Lighthouse. I think as we see more maturity in that product, I foreseeably sometime in the future, I could see us getting to a place where a fully Microsoft-driven MSP tool set is entirely plausible. So there were a couple others I flagged. One other one that came up during our initial session this morning that that came up just as my dock was dying, and I didn't know if I was still connected to the session or not. Was, can MFA be configured for if you have a user that's accessing Outlook, the desktop version of Outlook? And the answer to that is yes. And what it comes down to is the machine itself is going to be most likely a managed machine in some way, shape, or form, using one of the tools that we talked about. But as far as authenticating and utilizing Outlook itself, you can utilize modern authentication in order to set up MFA for that. The only concern that I've run into is sometimes for user accounts that have not authenticated to Office 365 before enabling MFA, sometimes you run into some weirdness. So if you have users that have not authenticated to Office 365 or your Azure AD instance before turning on MFA for Outlook, that's the only kind of gotcha you have to watch out for. The other option you have is you can use an application password, go into the user's security settings, generate an app password, and copy that into Outlook. That's kind of a pain to do, especially as it expires and things like that, right? So the other thing that I flagged here, best authentication type for a small company, password hash or pass-through authentication. This is another one of those security questions where I would say it depends. Really, it depends on your industry. Do you have any industry compliances that you have to adhere to? Are you working with ITAR customers? Do you have PCI, HIPAA? Those industry compliances that you have to worry about may dictate that question for you. Other than that, how technical are your users? That type of thing. I don't know if you have any particular thoughts on that, Simon, but that's kind of where I'm at with that one.
That's it. I mean, part of what you've ultimately got to understand is your users' education and knowledge as well. I used an example earlier, right? Are you a high-tech business where your entire staff are tech engineers, or are you just having to do remote workforce because you're forced to do that? So yeah, I don't think there's a global policy that fits every company. It's going to depend on factors and your own security needs. So use what makes sense, I think, is the best practice, right? We're providing framework and guidelines, but ultimately it's got to fit in for your users, your customers, and your security needs.
Yep. There's another question that just came in here. This is a good one, actually. For the clients that have had Office 365 for a while, obviously new security settings have come in, and there's new security features out. Is there a way to see what changes need to get adjusted to get them current? And I would say the answer there is SecureScore. The one question that they kind of followed it up with is, isn't there like a button where you can just press it and have it enable all those? And my response to that would be, there's a lot of features. There's a lot of features in that security stack there that I wouldn't want to just flip the switch on. One example that I'll give there is multi-factor authentication. I have seen cases where you just enable multi-factor authentication, the users get prompted to register their MFA stuff, and it usually works out. But the problem that I've seen run into is a lot of these users will be like, whoa, hey, this is asking me for a password or something. This looks really strange. And usually it ends up blowing up the help desk's phone line and causes panic and concern amongst management if they haven't been told. What I found with a lot of these features, especially if there's going to be some action on the user's part, that it needs to be very clearly communicated and discussed internally. Documentation should be sent out with screenshots of what the end users are supposed to expect, and it really makes the whole process go a lot simpler. I would say that there are probably very few of these security services that can be put into place without at least some level of internal discussion. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Simon. That's just my take.
Yeah, I think the question really around, the legacy user, you want to consider, right, what access does Microsoft have to that user as well? And so what I mean by that is, if you have a legacy user who's only using traditional AD, they're using an on-premise Exchange server, things like that, you're not going to get access to all of those features and capabilities that happen if that user's running up in the cloud and all of their data and components are up in the cloud. Nevertheless, as you're scanning your entire data center, assuming that your on-premise AD is connected, we're still going to go analyze some of the best practices. So generally what that's going to mean for a legacy user is Microsoft's going to do a best effort for scanning what they can. But if they don't have full access, not all of that data is stored in the cloud, there might be some limits to the breadth of what the security can test for it. But I think Security Score is going to be one of the best things. Just gradually work through the best practices, the action centers, and gradually bump it up. It's not going to be overnight. You're not going to flip a switch and get Security Score to 100%, right? It's a process. It's incremental. Something that might take a couple of months or even a year or longer to get there, but it's definitely an attainable goal.
Definitely. Well, with that, we are 10 minutes over. And again, if you asked a question that did not get answered, we'll be sure to do a follow-up blog post with a full list of the Q&A. Be looking for that in the next week or two. There's been a lot of great questions, so we want to make sure we take the time needed to give you guys good quality answers back. So with that, I think it's it from my end. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to join us today. Simon, I want to thank you for taking the time to come share your knowledge as well. It's been fun. We need to do more of these, don't we?
Oh, yeah. Now, I really appreciate everyone attending. It's such a critical juncture for everyone, right, with all the craziness that's happening in the world. So if there are additional resources, services which Altera can provide, let us know. Tell us what webinars you want to see. Share that information in the chat. We really do review. I take your feedback seriously. So thanks again for attending. Hopefully you got some great value out of this and you'll use these best practices to protect yourself and your users. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.